Good morning, everyone. Can I firstly welcome the Minister for Justice and the Minister assisting the Prime Minister on counter-terrorism, the Honourable Michael Keenan. Can I welcome members of the media and, of course, and I know no one won't be offended, but the people that make up AUSTRAC, the remarkable people that do the tireless work in protecting this country of ours, this very special country, and, of course, the community. So we've got a couple of things that we're going to be doing today. Most importantly, we'll be launching a very important risk assessment, and the Minister will talk to that shortly, as well as this is the first formal opportunity, given the Minister's busy schedule and important schedule overseas recently, to officially open the new facilities that we have here for AUSTRAC in Victoria. Those facilities which very much are reflective of the important cooperation that we need to do with not only other government partners but with industry. So without further ado, I welcome the Minister for Justice.
Well, good morning everyone, and thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and can I acknowledge you as the CEO of AUSTRAC. I'm very pleased to be here this morning to launch the new Melbourne office, but also to formally to launch AUSTRAC's Stored Value Card Risk Assessment. We know that the financial sector is often the first and last line of defence in helping us to prevent serious organised crime and to stop the financing of terrorism. The insights are critical to our ability to identify, target and disrupt threats to Australia and to the wider region. At the moment, we assess that there's about 100 Australians fighting in Syria and Iraq and engaging with terrorist groups in both of those countries. Since 2012, around 200 Australians have travelled to the conflict zone, and we also assess that about 70 Australians have been killed fighting there as well. Terrorism financing is a global issue that challenges all countries around the world. Now, whether it be a lone actor attack or a foreign fighter, none of the deplorable acts of terrorism would be possible without financing. And unfortunately, we know from bitter experience in Australia that small amounts of money can lead to financing of terrorist acts. Serious and organised crime, as a consequence of money laundering, also remains a pervasive threat. It undermines the Australian economy and often funds other crimes, including drug importation and trafficking. And just by way of example, 2 weeks ago in Western Australia, a Hong Kong national was sentenced to 10 years in prison for laundering more than $29 million in proceeds of crime. And I congratulate AUSTRAC for their work in tracking down that particular criminal. AUSTRAC's Stored Value Card Risk Assessment is the third in the series of assessments of Australia's financial industry, and importantly produced in partnership with the industry, and I'd like to acknowledge our industry partners who are here today. But this Stored Value Card Risk Assessment is perhaps the most important that AUSTRAC has produced. The assessment has identified how terrorist groups and organised criminal syndicates can, and unfortunately we know that they have, manipulate and exploit stored value cards to engage in criminal activity. Internationally, we have seen stored value cards, sometimes known as prepaid cards, fund terrorist attacks, including the horrific terrorist attacks that occurred in Paris in November 2015, where they were used by one of the terrorists to pay for accommodation and hire cars. In Australia, we also know that foreign fighters have used these cards to fund their terrorist activity before and after departure into the conflict zone, including withdrawing cash from ATMs along the transit points. Beyond terrorism financing, stored value cards have also been used to support cyber-enabled fraud, which includes cyber criminals transferring funds from victims' bank accounts onto stored value cards, then redeeming those stolen funds using stored value cards. It is suspected criminals are also using stored value cards to engage in money laundering by loading funds onto the card and a third party rapidly withdrawing cash from it from ATMs overseas. Overall, the report identifies that the criminal threat posed by the use of stored value cards is medium. However, as I've outlined, they carry a high level of vulnerability to misuse, which is the highest vulnerability rating in AUSTRAC's risk assessments program to date. Of the more than 900 suspicious matter reports analysed by AUSTRAC in this assessment, 40% relate to money laundering and 35% indicated cyber-enabled fraud. 12 stored value card terrorism financing reports were also analysed that related to cards being redeemed in countries that border Syria. To put the risk rating in context, a single load $100 e-gift card that can only be redeemed at an Australian clothing retailer, for example, would be relatively low risk. However, a reloadable stored value card that is accepted globally, such as those carrying a Visa or a MasterCard network, that can be redeemed in cash, would carry a higher risk of misuse. Now, this is not to say that we want Australians to stop using prepaid cards. They can help families better manage their budget and rely less on credit debt. And they provide flexibility for international travellers to access their funds easily around the world. This report is about educating the sector on the risks of potential exploitation, providing industry and the Australian public with a greater understanding of both the risks and their reporting obligations, maximises our ability to detect and disrupt these key national security and criminal threats. And I thank all of our industry partners who have worked with AUSTRAC on the development of this latest risk assessment. The Coalition Government is committed to protecting Australia's financial system. It's a vitally important part of our national security approach. And to do so, we've invested $127 million to establish a serious financial crime task force. We've given the AFP $15 million extra through its Fraud and Anti-Corruption Centre to tackle bribery and corruption. And we've given AUSTRAC a $20 million boost to detect and disrupt serious financial crimes. Importantly, this funding for AUSTRAC has ensured greater collaboration between the intelligence agency and the financial sector, including contributing to this new Melbourne office, where members of the Fintel Alliance will be based. The government is also consulting with industry on a package of legislative reforms which will implement the first phase of legislative amendments recommended by the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Statutory Review. In relation to issues within this risk assessment, I'm pleased to announce that AUSTRAC will convene an industry roundtable in the middle of this year with key stored value card businesses to discuss how industry can respond in the short and in the medium term. Now, we cannot entirely eliminate the risk of terrorism in Australia, but we can do everything to mitigate that risk. And we mitigate this risk, particularly in the financial sector, by partnering with industry and boosting collaboration between our international and domestic law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Now, I'd like to thank the analysts here at AUSTRAC for the work that they have done to keep Australia safe and the work that they will continue to do to keep our country safe. And given that this is the last public opportunity that I'll be able to do so, I'd also like to thank AUSTRAC's CEO, Mr. Paul Jeftovic, who's administered the agency over the past 2.5 years. I've recently announced that Paul will be departing for opportunities within the private sector after a very long career within the public sector, 35 years in the law enforcement community of this country. And I'd like to thank him very much publicly for the remarkable success that he's had during that 35 years and express the thanks of the Commonwealth Government for everything that he's achieved here at 2.5 years at AUSTRAC. So, Paul, thank you very much for what you've achieved in terms of keeping our country safe. And I wish you absolutely well for the future in pursuing these new opportunities. Now, finally, it gives me very great pleasure to formally open AUSTRAC's new office here in Melbourne. I hope that this is a productive place for the staff at AUSTRAC. And it's a modern environment. It enables them to have a very collaborative working environment. And it will be part of everything that AUSTRAC does to keep Australia's financial sector clean and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to mitigate the risks that are posed by criminal organisations and the risks that are posed by those that would seek to do us harm. So, Paul, I might invite you up and we can formally open the office. Well, it gives me great pleasure to formally open AUSTRAC's new new Melbourne office.
Thanks very much, Minister Keenan, and for coming today to do this very special opening for us. I'd now like to introduce the CEO of AUSTRAC, Paul Jevtovic.
I won't say too much more. The Minister's captured, I think, the important points about the risk assessment. I'd like to acknowledge industry. The last 2.5 years, went from the moment I took up my appointment, one of the key priorities that the Minister gave me was to significantly shift the nature of the relationship with industry. And I'm very proud to say that I believe AUSTRAC has done that. We now view industry as important partners in the fight against organised crime and terrorism in this country and globally. And I must say that this risk assessment represents an unprecedented level of cooperation with industry. There's no question that industry understands the criticality of the role they play. As the Minister said, they are often the first and last line of defence against the threats that our country faces. And we have been able to develop a framework where we can regulate industry, but yet at the same time view industry as important collaborators and partners. And so this risk assessment is yet another example of that. In the context of the Melbourne office, can I say that many people in AUSTRAC played a critical role in realising the new facilities here. I won't go into details as to who they are. You know who you are. We are extremely grateful for your contribution. It was quite remarkable that over a period of 72 hours, the move from the previous location to here, the following Monday morning, people were heads down and busy like they hadn't even moved. And that goes a lot to the culture in this organisation. This is, as the Minister said, my last official function and duties as the CEO. Obviously, I won't be too far away. Be kind to me as I become a reporting entity and you as the regulator. But I look forward to the ongoing cooperation. Obviously, I'll be doing it now from industry's perspective, but I'm very pleased that I know that not only do we have a government focused on working with industry, but that we have regulators in this country equally focused. Minister, can I thank you for taking the time? I know how busy you are, and I know how busy your recent travels overseas to build relationships, particularly with Middle Eastern counterparts was, and to make the time to come and recognise AUSTRAC people. We're extremely grateful for that, so thank you as much.